6 months ago, they pushed me out of that conference room like I was an invisible stain on their gray carpet. "You're not a good fit for our culture," they said with plastic smiles. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the CEO chair, and I know exactly who's getting fired first. The morning sun streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows of what used to be Doug Wexler's office. Now it's mine. Every stick of overpriced furniture, every pretentious piece of abstract art, every inch of this temple to corporate ego. Mine. My name is Rachel Moore, and until 6 months ago, I believed hard work and results were all that mattered in corporate America. At 32, I'd built my career on that naive foundation, climbing from junior marketer to marketing team lead at Sablepoint Innovations in just 4 years. The company, a tech startup in Marston, Ohio, had all the hallmarks of modern success: exposed brick walls, kombucha on tap, ping-pong tables nobody used, and motivational quotes plastered on every surface. I remember that Tuesday morning with surgical precision, the smell of overpriced espresso mixing with the artificial pine from someone's essential oil diffuser, the nervous tap of fingers on MacBooks, the forced laughter echoing from the collaboration pods, glass cages where creativity went to die. "Rachel, can you join us in conference room B?" Doug Wexler's assistant had materialized at my desk, her smile too bright for 9 a.m. I'd just landed our biggest client yet, a deal worth $2 million in annual revenue. My presentation deck was still open on my screen, ready for the team meeting at 10. I grabbed my coffee, thinking they wanted to discuss the rollout strategy. The conference room felt smaller than usual. Doug sat at the head of the table, flanked by HR Director Melissa Chen and legal counsel whose name I'd never bothered to learn. No laptops, no notebooks, just 3 pairs of eyes avoiding mine. "Please, sit." Doug gestured to the chair across from them, the interrogation seat. We used to joke. The words came wrapped in corporate doublespeak, but the message was crystal clear. Restructuring, cultural alignment, team dynamics, not the right fit. The phrase that would echo in my head for months: "You don't align with our company culture." "I don't understand," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "My performance reviews have been exceptional. I just closed the Meridian deal." "This isn't about performance," Melissa interrupted, her manicured nails clicking against her iPad. "It's about fit. The team feels you're distant, not collaborative enough." Distant. Because I didn't join their Thursday night bar crawls where Brad from sales got handsy after his 3rd whiskey. Because I ate lunch at my desk instead of gossiping in the kitchen. Because I focused on work at work. They'd prepared everything: a severance package, 2 weeks, take it or leave it. A non-disclosure agreement, a banker's box for my belongings, already waiting outside like a cardboard coffin. "We need your laptop and access badge," the lawyer finally spoke, sliding papers across the table. "Security will escort you out." 20 minutes. That's all it took to erase 4 years. Security, Mike, who I'd chatted with every morning, couldn't meet my eyes as he walked me to my desk. Colleagues pretended to be absorbed in their screens. The ones who did look up offered apologetic grimaces, already calculating their own survival odds. I dumped my personal items into the box. My coffee mug that said, "World's okayest employee." The succulent I'd managed not to kill. 3 tubes of lip balm. Phone charger. 4 years reduced to a box I could carry with one arm. The elevator ride felt eternal. Mike shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Rachel. You were one of the good ones." Were? Past tense. I'd already become a ghost story, a cautionary tale they'd whisper about during happy hour. "Remember Rachel?" "Yeah. Didn't fit the culture." You know what that means. The January air hit like a slap when the building's doors closed behind me. I stood on the sidewalk, holding my pathetic box, watching through the glass as Mike swiped his badge and disappeared back into the world I no longer belonged to. The Uber driver didn't try to make conversation. Maybe he recognized the shell-shocked look of the newly unemployed. I stared at my reflection in the window, trying to process what had just happened. The initial shock was already curdling into something else. Hurt, confusion, and underneath it all, a white-hot thread of rage. They'd fired me for not fitting their culture, their boys' club masquerading as a progressive workplace, their culture of stolen ideas and casual sexism wrapped in startup rhetoric. 6 months. That's all it would take to show them what their culture was really worth. The truth started trickling in 3 days after my termination. When Priya Patel called me from the Starbucks across from Sable Point, we'd worked together on the product launch team, one of the few people who'd actually had my back. They made us sign something, she said, voice barely above a whisper, constantly checking over her shoulder. About not contacting you. But fuck that. You deserve to know. She slid her phone across the table, showing me screenshots of Slack conversations I was never meant to see. My stomach churned as I read, Rachel's not really a team player. Doug Wexler. She makes things uncomfortable for everyone. Brad Kellerman. Maybe if she smiled more. Anonymous. Her attitude doesn't fit what we're building here. Jason Torres. My attitude, my fucking attitude. While Brad took credit for my campaign strategies, while Jason presented my data insights as his own. While Doug held court at mandatory team drinks, his hand lingering too long on female employees' shoulders. There's more, Priya said, pulling up her email. Remember the Meridian deal? Of course I remembered. I'd spent 3 months cultivating that relationship, flying to Chicago twice on my own dime because Doug said there wasn't budget for travel. Jason's taking credit for it, full credit, told everyone you were just support staff on the project. The coffee turned to acid in my mouth. But the emails, the whole paper trail, gone. It accidentally purged your account. Very convenient timing. I thought back to all the warning signs I'd ignored. How my ideas would disappear in meetings, only to resurface from male colleagues' mouths. How I was aggressive when I pushed back. But Brad was passionate. How they'd slowly excluded me from strategy sessions, client dinners, decision-making conversations. The final straw, Priya continued, was when you turned down Doug's invitation to that conference in Vegas. The one where he booked a suite and suggested you could share to save company money. My hands clenched around the coffee cup. I'd politely declined, citing a fictional family obligation. 2 weeks later, I was out. He's done it before, she added. Lisa from accounting, Vanessa from design. They all didn't fit the culture after saying no to him. The pattern was so clear now, like looking at one of those magic eye pictures that suddenly snaps into focus. Sable Point's culture wasn't about innovation or collaboration. It was about compliance, about knowing your place, about playing the game by rules that were never written down but everyone understood. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Priya gathered her things, glancing nervously at the door. Because someone needs to know. Because I'm tired of pretending this is normal. Because, she paused, shouldering her bag. Because I'm giving my notice next week, and I wanted to clear my conscience. After she left, I sat there for another hour, screenshots saved to my phone, mind racing. They hadn't just stolen my job, they'd stolen my work, my reputation, my professional identity, reduced me to a cautionary tale about fitting in. But Priya had given me something valuable, confirmation that this wasn't about my performance or my personality. This was about power, about a toxic ecosystem that fed on the ambitions of people like me while protecting mediocre men who knew how to play the game. That night, I pulled up Sable Point's website. Their About Us page made me laugh, bitter and sharp. We foster an inclusive environment where diverse perspectives thrive. Below it, the leadership team. 8 men, 2 women. Both women in soft roles, HR and operations, both hired after me. Both, I now realized, probably counting down to their own expiration dates. I clicked through to their investors page, studying the venture capital firms that kept Sable Point afloat, then their clients, their partners, their entire ecosystem of enablers who either didn't know or didn't care what kind of culture their money was supporting. Doug Wexler's LinkedIn profile showed him speaking at a conference about building dynamic corporate cultures. I wondered how many women had been pushed out to create his dynamic culture, how many ideas he'd stolen, how many careers he'd derailed while climbing his own ladder. The rage had crystallized into something harder, colder. They thought they'd deleted me, erased my contributions, made me disappear. But they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd left me with nothing to lose. And someone with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in any boardroom. The unemployment checks were a joke, barely enough to cover my studio apartment in Marston's gentrified downtown. I sent out resumes like distress signals, tailoring each one to match keywords in job descriptions. Marketing director, brand strategist, growth lead, the same positions I was overqualified for, now suddenly out of reach. We've decided to go with someone who's a better cultural fit. We're looking for someone more aligned with our values. Your experience is impressive, but cultural fit? The phrase had become corporate kryptonite, following me from interview to interview. Word travels fast in Marston's tech scene. One Google search of my name probably led straight to Doug Wexler's network, his version of events spreading like wildfire through LinkedIn connections and happy hour gossip. By week 6, I'd stopped crying. By week 8, I'd stopped checking my email obsessively. By week 10, I was considering a job at Target just to keep the lights on. Then Amanda Chen called. We'd met at a marketing conference 2 years earlier, bonding over terrible keynote speeches and overpriced wine. She ran a boutique consultancy, helping small businesses with their digital strategies. I heard what happened at Sable Point, she said without preamble. Doug Wexler is a prick. Everyone knows it. Want to do some freelance work for me? The first project was small, social media strategy for a local bakery, then a website redesign for a law firm, email campaigns for a nonprofit, nothing glamorous. But it paid the bills and, more importantly, taught me something I'd never learned in the corporate bubble. I learned how businesses really worked. Not the Silicon Valley fantasy of infinite venture capital and hockey stick growth, but the grinding reality of cash flow, customer acquisition costs, and razor-thin margins. I learned to read balance sheets, understand equity structures, decode the language of investors. One client, a manufacturing company considering selling to private equity, let me sit in on their negotiations. I watched vultures in expensive suits pick apart 40 years of family business, looking for weaknesses to exploit. I took notes. I learned. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, Amanda forwarded me an article from TechCrunch. Sable Point Innovations faces fourth quarter of losses, considers strategic options. Strategic options. Corporate speak for we're fucked. I dug deeper. Their star client, the Meridian deal I'd closed, had jumped ship after a botched product launch. 2 key developers had been poached by Google. Their latest funding round had fallen through. The board was getting nervous. But the killing blow was buried in paragraph 12. Sources close to the matter suggest potential acquisition interest from several private equity firms, though the company's current valuation remains a sticking point. They were bleeding out, and the sharks were circling. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety or sadness, but from the electric thrill of possibility. Sable Point was vulnerable. More vulnerable than they'd ever been when they'd pushed me out of that conference room. I pulled up every financial report I could find, studied their burn rate, analyzed their client roster. By dawn, I had a 20-page document outlining exactly how and why Sable Point was failing, and more importantly, how it could be saved. The culture Doug had built wasn't just toxic, it was expensive. High turnover meant constant recruiting costs. Stolen ideas meant no real innovation. The boys' club mentality had created an echo chamber where bad decisions went unchallenged. But the bones of the company were good. The technology platform I'd helped market was solid. The client relationships, the ones they hadn't destroyed, had potential. Strip away the toxic leadership, inject actual talent, and Sable Point could be worth something. I looked at my laptop screen, at the financial models I'd built, at the opportunity taking shape in spreadsheet cells and market analysis. They'd fired me for not fitting their culture. But what if I didn't need to fit their culture? What if I could own it instead? The plan came together like a fever dream. I'd need investors. I'd need to move fast. I'd need to bury my identity until the last possible moment. But first, I needed to make a call. Stonegate Capital, the receptionist answered. I'd like to speak with someone about a potential acquisition opportunity, I said, my voice steady and professional. I have a company in distress that could be turned around with the right leadership. She transferred me to an analyst, then an associate, then a partner. By the end of the day, I had a meeting scheduled. Rachel Moore, the marketing director who didn't fit the culture, was dead. But from her ashes, something else was rising, something harder, hungrier, something with a checkbook. The offices of Sierra Grove Capital occupied the top floor of a glass tower in Columbus, all marble and mahogany and calculated intimidation. I'd dressed carefully, my best suit, the one I'd bought for what I thought would be my promotion at Sable Point. Now it felt like armor. Marcus Holloway, the partner who'd taken my call, looked exactly like Central Casting's idea of a private equity shark, silver-haired, hawk-eyed, with a handshake that could crush walnuts. His associate, a razor-sharp woman named Delilah Cross, took notes on a laptop that cost more than my car. Ms. Moore, Marcus began, settling back in his leather chair. You claim to have insights into Sable Point innovations that make it an attractive acquisition target. The market seems to disagree. I'd incorporated a shell company the week before, RMG Ventures, bland and forgettable. Officially, I was presenting as an independent consultant who'd done deep market research. Unofficially, I was about to eviscerate my former employer. The market sees a company hemorrhaging talent and clients, I said, pulling up my presentation. What they don't see is why. For the next hour, I laid out Sable Point's dysfunction with surgical precision, the toxic culture that drove away top performers, the stolen ideas that stifled innovation, the leadership team more interested in their egos than their P&L. I named names, cited examples, showed the direct correlation between Doug Wexler's management style and the company's decline. You have very specific information, Delilah observed, eyes narrowing, almost like an insider's perspective. I've done my research, I replied evenly, including exit interviews with former employees. The patterns are clear. I showed them my models. What Sable Point was worth now, barely enough to cover their debts. What it could be worth with competent leadership, triple the current valuation within 18 months. The technology is solid, the market position is salvageable, the client relationships can be rebuilt. All it needs is leadership that values talent over politics. Marcus exchanged glances with Delilah. And you're proposing what, exactly? This was the moment, the leap off the cliff. I'm proposing that Sierra Grove fund my acquisition of Sable Point. I'll put in $200K of my own capital, my entire savings, my 401K, everything, and run the turnaround. You get 70% equity with preferred shares. I get 30% and operational control. That's ambitious for someone with no CEO experience, Marcus said. I have no experience running a company into the ground, I countered. Doug Wexler has 5 years of that. I'm offering you a chance to buy a distressed asset at basement prices and flip it within 2 years. All I need is the capital and the authority. The silence stretched. Marcus tapped his pen against his notepad, calculating. What makes you think the board will sell to you? I smiled for the first time. They won't know it's me. RMG Ventures will make the offer. A clean, anonymous buyer with Sierra Grove's backing. By the time they realize who's actually taking over, the papers will be signed. Delilah leaned forward. This feels personal, Ms. Moore. Business is always personal when you're good at it, I said. The question is whether personal motivation gets results. I'm betting 30 years of your returns say it does. Marcus stood, walked to the window overlooking the Columbus skyline. The silence was suffocating. We'll need due diligence, full financials, board approval for the sale. I can get you everything within 2 weeks. He turned back. And if your turnaround fails? Then you liquidate the assets and write off the loss. But I won't fail. I met his gaze. I know exactly what's broken because I watched them break it. More importantly, I know how to fix it. Another long pause. Then Marcus extended his hand. We'll draw up a term sheet. If your information proves accurate and the board accepts our offer, you'll have your funding. His grip was firm. Don't make me regret this, Ms. Moore. Walking out of Sierra Grove, I felt lightheaded. 6 months ago, I'd been escorted from a building in shame. Now I was orchestrating the takeover of the company that had discarded me. My phone buzzed. An email from Delilah. Term sheet by Monday. Start preparing your war chest. War chest. I like that. Because this was war, just fought with contracts and capital instead of weapons. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the commitment letter from Sierra Grove. $10 million. Enough to buy Sable Point and fund its resurrection. Doug Wexler thought he'd ended my career. Instead, he'd just taught me to play a different game. His game. And I was going to win. The morning I walked back into Sable Point Innovations, the receptionist dropped her coffee. Ms. Moore? Jenny stammered, scrambling for paper towels. I thought, we heard you were in a meeting with the leadership team. I finished smoothly. Conference room A. Could you let them know the new ownership has arrived? I'd dressed deliberately. Not the power suit they'd expect from a corporate raider, but the same outfit I'd worn my first day 4 years ago. Navy dress, modest heels, the watch my father gave me when I graduated college. A ghost returning to haunt them. The elevator ride felt shorter than I remembered. Same abstract art on the walls. Same motivational posters. Same smell of desperation masked by expensive air freshener. The conference room was already full when I entered. Doug Wexler sat at the head of the table, my table now, flanked by his leadership team. Jason Torres, Brad Kellerman. The whole boys' club, assembled for what they thought was a meet and greet with their new corporate overlords. Doug's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief. Then, beautifully, fear. Rachel. His voice cracked slightly. What are you doing here? I set my laptop at the head of the table, taking my time. Let them squirm. I'm here for the transition meeting, I said pleasantly. Didn't Sierra Grove inform you? I'm the managing partner of RMG Ventures, your new CEO. The silence was exquisite. Brad's mouth actually fell open. Jason went pale. Doug gripped the table edge like he might fall through the floor. This is a joke, Doug managed. You can't. This isn't legal. Check the contracts you signed. Possible? Check your bank account for the wire transfer. I opened my laptop, pulling up the presentation I'd prepared. Now, let's discuss the transition. The numbers were brutal. Every failure, every missed target, every bad decision laid out in unforgiving detail. But the real knife twist was the employee satisfaction data. Anonymous surveys I'd commissioned that painted a picture of a company rotting from the inside. 68% of employees report feeling undervalued. 43% have actively looked for other jobs in the past quarter. And here's my favorite. I click to the next slide. 91% cite toxic leadership culture as their primary concern. You orchestrated this, Doug sputtered. This is corporate sabotage. We'll sue. With what money? I asked mildly. You're 3 months from insolvency. Your board sold because they had no choice. And as for sabotage, I smiled. I didn't make you lose the Meridian account. That was your incompetence after you stole credit for the deal I closed. Jason shifted uncomfortably. He'd been the one to bungle the Meridian relationship, too arrogant to maintain what I'd built. Here's what happens next, I continued. Effective immediately, the following leadership changes are being made. I read the list like a death roll. Doug Wexler, terminated. Jason Torres, terminated. Brad Kellerman, terminated. One by one. The architects of Sable Point's toxic culture fell. You can't do this, Brad protested. We have contracts, which include morality clauses and performance metrics you've all failed to meet. I slid termination packets across the table. Security is waiting outside to escort you out. You have 20 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Doug stood, face flushed. You bitter bitch. This is about Vegas, isn't it? Because I made a pass. No. I cut him off. This is about business. You built a culture that hemorrhaged talent and rewarded mediocrity. You stole ideas and crushed innovation. You created a company that deserves to fail. I stood too, meeting his rage with ice. I'm here to fix what you broke. The fact that I get to fire you is just a bonus. He lunged forward, but Mike from security, the same Mike who'd escorted me out 6 months ago, stepped into the room. Gentlemen, Mike said calmly, time to go. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. One by one, they filed out, carrying their bankers' boxes, experiencing the walk of shame they'd subjected so many others to. Doug paused at the door, turning back. This won't work. The company needs a culture that values talent over politics, I suggested. Innovation over ego, results over rhetoric. You're right. It does need that. Which is why you're leaving. After they were gone, I sat alone in the conference room, the same room where they'd ended my career, the same table where they'd dismissed me as not a cultural fit. Outside, I could see employees gathering, whispering, processing the palace coup that had just occurred. Tomorrow, I'd address them all, outline the new vision, promise them the meritocracy Sable Point had always pretended to be. But for now, I savored the silence, the empty chairs, the knowledge that Doug Wexler was being escorted out of his own building, carrying his possessions in a box, becoming the ghost story he'd tried to make of me, cultural fit. They'd been right about one thing. I hadn't fit their culture, because I was built for something better. The office was quiet now, the kind of quiet that settles after a storm, heavy with the weight of change. I sat in what used to be Doug's corner office, watching the sun set over Marston's skyline. No victory champagne, no celebration, just me and the echo of everything that had led to this moment. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't read, former colleagues expressing shock, industry contacts seeking gossip. My mother, who still didn't know what I'd done with my life savings. Tomorrow, I'd deal with all of it. Tonight, I just wanted to sit with the strange hollowness of achieved revenge. I traced my finger along the desk's edge, remembering how I'd once stood on the other side, presenting ideas that would be stolen by the next meeting. The desk was expensive, ostentatious, Doug's attempt to project power he'd never truly earned. Tomorrow, it would be gone, replaced with something functional, something real. The funny thing about revenge is how anticlimactic it feels when you finally get it. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times during those sleepless nights. The look on Doug's face, the poetic justice of using his own game against him. But sitting here now, I felt empty. Not disappointed, just empty. A knock on the door interrupted my solitude. Jenny, the receptionist, peered in nervously. Ms. Moore? I'm sorry to disturb you, but I wanted to say... She paused, gathering courage. Thank you. For what you did today, Doug. Well, a lot of us have stories. I nodded, unsurprised. Men like Doug always had multiple victims. Things will be different now. I believe you. She hesitated. Is it true you're bringing in new leadership? People from outside? Some. But I'm also promoting from within. People who were overlooked because they didn't play politics. I thought of the list I'd been compiling. The quiet talents who'd kept Sable Point running despite its leadership, not because of it. Real talent, real experience. After Jenny left, I opened my laptop and scrolled through the employee directory. So many faces I recognized. Good people trapped in a bad system. Tomorrow, I'd start interviews, listen to their ideas, build something worth working for. My email dinged, Doug Wexler, from his personal account. You think you've won, but you don't understand this business. You'll fail within 6 months, and I'll be there to pick up the pieces. I almost responded, almost gave him the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under my skin. Instead, I archived the message and pulled up my transition plan. Let him watch from the sidelines. Let him see what real leadership looked like. The truth was, I didn't know if I'd succeed. Running a company was different from planning its takeover. The weight of other people's livelihoods, careers, dreams. It was heavier than any banker's box of personal belongings. But I knew what failure looked like. I'd studied it for 6 months, dissected it with spreadsheets and market analysis. I knew every mistake Doug had made, every opportunity he'd squandered. I wouldn't repeat them. Outside, the parking lot was emptying. Normal people going home to normal lives, unaware that their workplace had just undergone a seismic shift. Tomorrow, they'd arrive to find new leadership, new policies, new possibilities. Or maybe just the absence of old fears. I thought about the women who'd been pushed out before me. Lisa from accounting, Vanessa from design, others whose names I'd never learned. I couldn't undo what had been done to them. Couldn't restore careers that had been derailed. But I could make sure it never happened again. My reflection in the window looked older than it had 6 months ago. Harder. Maybe that was the real price of revenge. Not what it cost in money or effort, but what it carved away from your soul. The optimistic young woman who'd believed in meritocracy was gone. In her place sat someone who understood power, who'd learned to wield it like a weapon. A text from Marcus at Sierra Grove. Impressive first day. The board is pleased. Don't fuck it up. I smiled. The first genuine smile in hours. Trust private equity to reduce everything to its essence. One last look around the office that had been the symbol of everything wrong with Sable Point. Tomorrow, I'd begin the real work. Building something from the wreckage, proving that success didn't require sacrifice of ethics or dignity. But tonight, in the gathering darkness, I allowed myself one moment of pure satisfaction. Not the wild triumph I'd expected, but something quieter, deeper. Doug Wexler had taught me that culture mattered. He'd been right about that, dead wrong about what kind of culture created success, but right about its importance. The email I'd scheduled sent automatically, reaching every Sable Point employee at exactly 5 p.m. Team, I'm excited to announce a new chapter for Sable Point Innovations, one built on merit, innovation, and mutual respect. Tomorrow, we begin building a culture where the best ideas win, regardless of who presents them, where talent is recognized and rewarded, where fitting in means contributing your best work, not playing politics. Welcome to the company you deserve. Rachel Moore, CEO. This time, I decide what the culture is. I stepped out of the building at 7:43 p.m., laptop bag slung over my shoulder, car keys jingling in my hand. The same exit I'd taken 6 months ago, but everything was different now. No security escort, no banker's box of shame, just me, walking out of my own company on my own terms. The parking lot was nearly empty, illuminated by the harsh glow of LED streetlights. My heels clicked against the asphalt, a sound I'd once associated with power, then with humiliation, now with something harder to define. Responsibility? Maybe. Or just exhaustion. I'd parked in Doug's old spot. CEO reserved. The sign would be changed tomorrow to simply reserved. No need for hierarchical posturing. But tonight, I'd allowed myself that one small satisfaction. My car, the same sensible Honda I'd driven for 5 years, looked out of place among the remaining luxury vehicles. Marcus had suggested I upgrade. Project success, but I'd declined. I knew who I was. What I'd built. A Maserati wouldn't change that. As I settled into the driver's seat, I noticed movement near the entrance. A small group of employees emerging, probably from the engineering team that always worked late. They saw me, hesitated, then one waved. Tentative. Hopeful. I waved back. Tomorrow would bring 100 fires to put out, clients to reassure, investors to update, culture to rebuild from the ground up. The real work was just beginning. And I had no illusions about how hard it would be. You can't fix years of dysfunction overnight, no matter how satisfying the initial purge. But tonight, driving through Marston's quiet streets, I allowed myself to feel the weight lift. Not all of it, I'd carry some of those scars forever. The knowledge of how quickly loyalty could turn to betrayal, how culture could be weaponized against anyone who didn't conform, how the game was rigged, had always been rigged, unless you found a way to buy the whole damn casino. I stopped at the same Starbucks where Priya had shown me the truth. Through the window, I could see a young woman hunched over a laptop, probably working on her own dreams, her own climb up a ladder that might collapse beneath her at any moment. Part of me wanted to warn her. Part of me knew she'd have to learn her own lessons. The barista recognized me, started to smile, then looked confused. Hey, didn't you used to work at Sable Point? I still do, I said, ordering my usual grande cold brew, no sugar, extra ice. Just in a different capacity. She didn't push for details, but I saw her Google me as I waited for my coffee, watched her eyes widen as she found the TechCrunch article that had gone live an hour ago. Former marketing director returns as CEO in stunning takeover of Sable Point Innovations. The cold brew tasted like victory. Or maybe just like coffee. It was hard to tell anymore. Back in my apartment, I set the coffee on the kitchen counter and finally let myself check the messages. Dozens of LinkedIn notifications. Former colleagues congratulating me or fishing for jobs. A few from people I'd interviewed with during my unemployed months, suddenly very interested in catching up. One message stood out, from Lisa, the accountant who'd been pushed out before me. I heard what you did. I've been following Sable Point's downfall and hoping someone would make them pay. Thank you for being that someone. If you need a CFO who actually knows how to read a balance sheet, you know where to find me. I smiled, adding her name to my growing list. Maybe that was the real revenge, not just taking over, but building something better with all the talent Doug had discarded. The final email was waiting in my drafts, scheduled to send at 8 p.m. sharp. Doug's personal email address in the recipient field. 5 words that said everything. Don't forget, clear your desk. I hit send and closed my laptop. Somewhere across town, Doug Wexler's phone was buzzing. Tomorrow, he'd wake up unemployed, his reputation in tatters, his culture dismantled by someone he'd dismissed as not fitting in. He'd know how it felt to be erased, to be told you didn't belong in the world you'd helped build. But I wouldn't be thinking about Doug tomorrow. I'd be thinking about the 143 people still employed at Sable Point, about the culture we'd build together, about the company we could become when talent mattered more than politics. I raised my cold brew in a toast to no one, to ghost stories with happy endings, to cultural misfits who bought the whole damn company, to the beautiful truth that sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living well in the corner office they said you'd never deserve. This time, I decide what the culture is, and it would never include people like Doug Wexler again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever faced a toxic workplace culture? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments below.